It may seem like a throwaway phrase in our reading today, what our section from Haggai starts with. But if we were fluent in early Jewish tradition, it would make sense, or even in present day. In the 7th month, on the 21st day of the month, would have been at the end of the festival of Sukkot, one of the 3 annual festivals where every male Jew was to be in Jerusalem. It was a celebration of harvest, of God's protection, and often a pretty joyous celebration. And into that atmosphere, the prophet is tasked with speaking. Speak now to the governor, to the high priest, to the remnant of the people, and tell them not to fear. Who is left among you and who that saw this house in its former glory? How does it look to you now? Take courage. The reading says, take courage, all you people of the land. Work, for I am with you according to the promise that I made you when you came out of Egypt. And that wonderful phrase, my spirit abides among you. Do not fear. The prophet is told to tell a tale to the people who are certainly living in fear of what it would be to rebuild their lives, what it would be to once again get invested in building their lives again. And so they are reminded that it will take work, yes, but that does not mean it will not happen. The people are told to take stock of where they are, who they are, and to get to the living, while they hold on to this thread of hope for God's fulfilled promise of compassion. As we sit here, people young and older, people who have been at this church since it was the Reformed Church of Hummelstown, who remember when the community battled over elevators or properties, who welcomed and said goodbye to pastors well before my time, and as people who just came this year, maybe even just today, who know little about the history of each stone, each window, or even our denomination, or the way we share in mission. This is a story told to us too. A prophet's call to listen deeply for God's calling among us, charting a new course, pushing us forward as we reflect and in our looking back so that we can find tomorrow. So God's work never feels complete when God's people are in need of us, our vitality, our passion, our heart, our hands. The last 2 weeks, we have been talking around this topic of the church through our scriptures in an effort to prime our conversations for our gathering today after church. While for some of us, the idea of an all-gift team meeting sounds like a chore, or like it doesn't need our investment, what the gift team board and I have been talking about for a few months as we put this date on the calendar was encouraging us to remember just how important these times are and how important you are. So 2 weeks ago, we put some thought and conversation into what the personal needs of ourselves are and what we have to offer the world through the story of the Pharisee and the tax collector and their very different ways of praying. We made known our needs, our prayers in the light of community, without the vain expectation that God will hear our prayers better, like that Pharisee did. And yet, with enough confidence to claim it out loud, we allowed ourselves to put out there our need for patience, wisdom, peace, courage, kindness, or just a way to contact an old friend. In this community where honesty allows us the space to place our thoughts and concerns on God's altar, we come to share the good news of God's love for all of us, and to remember that no matter the concerns on our heart, we still have something to give, a gift, a blessing, an offering that someone is in need of, from monetary help to leadership, food, compassion, and humor. This place continues to invite us deeper into relationships with each other and with God, with Jesus, and with our faith. Through the lens of little Zacchaeus in the tree, last week we imagined what it was to give fourfold back to the community of this church, the community outside the church, and even the community that is created of the church. Zacchaeus was called in his relationship with Christ to be restored to his community, to seek their welfare and their benefit. This is at the heart of church, the invitation to relationship, to be in relationship with change makers, in ourselves and in others. Because our God is a God of change, who welcomes and makes a way through stagnant times, who continues to hold us tightly as we change, as we grow, as we find our gifts used by the world in need. We have asked, and many of us have answered, what our gifts are for the people of this place, our fellow disciples. Things like being on the board, baking pies, kindness, a listening ear, gratitude. What our gifts are for this place, the skills of maintenance and upkeep, no small task indeed, but also the creativity, the caretaking of our archives and our history, and even our leadership here in worship. What our gifts are for those outside this example of Christ-centered community, too. Without the gifts we offer to those outside, could we say that we were following Jesus, who called his people to leave their lives in search of caring for the lost, the broken, the outcast? So we too offer gifts of advocacy, time, conversation, warmth, building, digital outreach, and justice. We are clearly a community with remarkable and rewarding abilities, a people who are looking for how this will be filled with God's splendor, as Haggai speaks of. And we are a people who have already gone through much change and who are being asked to go through even more. To be church in this moment in the U.S., to be a church who can see the struggle of so many other communities, Christian and not, of faith and secular, and see how many have failed, are failing, or are just stuck in the sadness. To be the church God has called into being from the very first is to make sure that we don't stay there in the separation of life today, in the grief of a post or mid-pandemic world. It is to see the myriad of troubles plaguing the places we love most: gun violence, polarization, a lack of funding, hatred, and to know that God is with us in that life, that pain. The world is just starting to ask what it means to be relevant church today, what it means to be people with big hearts. This is the state we are in. It is true, but it is not dire. There is more hope in this place, in our faith stories of Scripture, than a lifetime could possibly ever hold. God comes to us through hope from every place we let light in. And if there is ever a place that lets the light in, it might be here. As Leonard Cohen wrote, there's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. There are so many cracks in our world, and that just gives us more places to see and to seek and to find a way to show our care through the work we do. In our gospel reading today, Jesus is invited into a trap question on the resurrection. In our modern progressive discourse, maybe the entire conversation of resurrection could be thought of as a trap. An intellectual trap of explaining through scientific means the inexplicable, rewriting historical understanding in modern terms, or of just holding on to traditional terminology without comprehension. None of which seem a helpful undertaking in the world of Wikipedia and crowdsourcing and scientific experimentation. Resurrection has become a battlefield. But what isn't is the need to rebuild, to restore, to renew. These are exactly what the world needs, what we need communally and personally. And they are what resurrection is all about. Rebuild, restore, renew. Without getting into the legalities of this challenge, without getting bogged down with questions of how to raise the dead, Jesus takes this challenge and turns it around, restores the question to be a statement of God's investment in you, in them, in us throughout time. From Jesus to these ancestors of faith, Jesus calls them all alive still. And this is his answer to the question of resurrection, that to God, everyone, everywhere is alive. This is the kind of joyful, divine personhood filled with life, with a God who is outside of time, outside of the physical limitations of our body's expiration dates. To this timeless spirit of unity, we are to center in our lives, to work in this world so that we might celebrate with God who is already celebrating. We can spend our time thinking about how best to prove God to those who would challenge them, or we can spend our time luxuriating in the light of God's renewal and revival that is already happening. What is resurrection, and what should we think about it? What have we thought about it? But maybe, most importantly, what will we think about it tomorrow? We are a people of rebuilding. Rebuilding our structures to ensure that we meet more frequently to plan the next event. Sure. But also rebuilding our passions that are the reason that you all chose this governance in days past. Why we chose this church today and every time we enter. Reigniting our spirits with a potluck meal, and then some conversation. Some connections, new and old, a celebration of God's story among us on this 6th day of the 11th month. From prophets long gone and even longer gone, to the voice of God pulling us into community and congregation today, we have been, will have been, always will be God's family, present and accounted for. May it be so today. Amen.